The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that split Evelyn's world in two. Sold to the gentleman in black for 32 million euros. 32 million. The price of her father's debt, the price of her freedom, the price of her life. Through the stage lights burning her eyes, she couldn't see his face, only the outline of broad shoulders, the glint of a ring catching light as he raised one hand in acknowledgement. Somewhere in the murmuring crowd of masked elites, a man had just purchased her like livestock, and in 6 hours she would belong to him completely. Heir said, "If you want to see how Evelyn's story unfolds, from captive to something far more dangerous, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world." The rain had started 3 hours ago, and Evelyn Rossi was still pretending everything was fine. She sat in the corner of Caffè Letterario, her favorite refuge in Milan's Brera district, sketching the old man across the room who'd fallen asleep over his espresso. The pencil moved across the page in familiar rhythms, curve of his collar, shadow beneath his chin, the way his fingers still curled around the tiny cup even in sleep. Outside, the October rain painted the cobblestones dark and slick, turning the streetlights into watercolor smudges against the early evening gloom. Her phone had been vibrating all afternoon, 12 missed calls from her father. She'd ignored everyone. It wasn't unusual for Paolo Rossi to be dramatic. Her father had built an entire personality around grand gestures and passionate speeches about art, literature, the sanctity of beauty in an ugly world. But there was something different in the 4 voicemails she'd finally listened to during her walk from the university. His voice had been too tight, too controlled, like a man trying very hard not to scream. "Evie, sweetheart, please call me back. It's important. Very important. Don't go home tonight. Go to your friend Anna's place, yes, the one in Navigli. Stay there. I'll explain everything, but please, Tesoro, don't go home." She'd deleted it, then immediately regretted it and listened to the next one. "Evelyn, I'm serious. Some people are looking for me, and I need you to be somewhere safe while I sort this out. It's just a misunderstanding. You know how these things are, but until I can—" A noise in the background, voices, and then her father's voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Just trust me, Amor. Don't go to the apartment." The last voicemail had been only 5 words. "I'm sorry, Evie, I'm sorry." That was 2 hours ago, and her phone had been silent since. Evelyn pressed too hard with the pencil, and the lead snapped against the paper. The old man jerked awake at the sound, blinked at his cold espresso, and shuffled toward the door, muttering about the rain. She watched him go, then looked down at the ruined sketch, his peaceful face now marred by a jagged black line across his throat. She should call him back, she should. Instead, she packed up her things, sketchbook, pencils, the battered copy of If, on a winter's night, a traveler she'd been rereading for the 3rd time, and stepped out into the rain. She didn't have an umbrella, hadn't needed one this morning when the sky was blue, and her biggest concern was whether Professor Martelli would accept her essay on Calvino 2 days late. That was 6 hours ago, before the voicemails, before the knot of dread that had been tightening in her stomach all afternoon. The walk to her apartment in Porta Venezia took 20 minutes on a good day. Tonight, with the rain and her reluctance to actually arrive, it took 40. By the time she turned onto Via Tadino, her jacket was soaked through and her canvas shoes squelched with every step. The street was quieter than usual for 7:30 on a Thursday. No couples hurrying toward dinner, no students smoking outside the wine bar on the corner, just empty sidewalks and the hiss of rain against pavement. She was 3 buildings away from home when she noticed the car. Black Mercedes. Tinted windows. Engine running, exhaust ghosting white in the rain-chilled air. It was parked directly in front of her building's entrance, blocking the sidewalk in a way that was absolutely illegal and absolutely intentional. Evelyn stopped walking. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Don't go home, she should turn around. Should go to Anna's place like he'd said, or to the university library, or literally anywhere else. But her laptop was upstairs. Her passport, her notebooks, the shoebox under her bed with 300 euros she'd been saving since summer. Everything that mattered was in that 4th-floor walk-up with the broken elevator and the landlady who complained about her music. The car's back door opened. A man stepped out into the rain, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. He was massive, not tall, but built like a wall. his shoulders straining the seams of an expensive suit that looked absurd on someone shaped like a bulldozer. He didn't bother with an umbrella, just stood there in the downpour looking directly at her. Evelyn Rossi? His voice carried across the distance between them, flat and professional. She took a step backward. I think you have the wrong person. We both know I don't. He moved toward her with surprising speed for someone his size. Your father sent us. My father doesn't know anyone who drives a Mercedes. Another step back. Her shoulder blades hit the wall of the building behind her. Your father, the man said, still closing the distance, owes our employer a considerable amount of money. Since he's proven difficult to locate, we're here to collect something of equal value. The world tilted sideways. Evelyn's hand found her phone in her pocket, fingers fumbling for the power button, the emergency call function, anything. I don't have any money. I'm a student. I work part-time at a bookstore. I can barely afford— We're not here for money, Miss Rossi. Two more men emerged from the car. They moved with the same purposeful efficiency, forming a loose semicircle that cut off any escape route down the sidewalk. One of them held what looked like a black canvas bag. Evelyn's legs were shaking. Please, I don't know anything about my father's business. I don't even know what he does for a living anymore. He just said it was consulting, corporate consulting, and I never asked because— Your father, the first man interrupted, runs one of the largest money laundering operations in northern Italy. Or he did, until he decided to expand into pharmaceuticals using funds that weren't his to use. 15 million euros to be precise. Our employer wants compensation. 15 million. The number was so absurd it didn't even sound real. I can't possibly— There's no way I could ever eat— You can't. But you're worth something to him, which makes you worth something to us. He nodded to the others. Get her in the car. Evelyn ran. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just spun away from the wall and bolted down the sidewalk in the opposite direction. Her wet shoes slipped on the pavement and she nearly went down, caught herself against a parked Vespa, kept running. Behind her she heard cursing and the heavy slap of footsteps. She made it half a block before something hard caught her across the shoulders and slammed her into the side of a building. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Strong hands grabbed her arms, wrenched them behind her back, and she was dimly aware that she was screaming, high and desperate and completely useless because there was no one on this street, no one to hear her, no one to help. The black canvas bag came down over her head. Darkness swallowed everything. She thrashed and kicked, connected with something solid that made someone grunt. But then there were more hands, too many hands, lifting her off her feet. The world spun. She heard a car door open, felt herself being shoved into a confined space, heard the door slam shut with a finality that made her stomach drop. Drive, someone said. The engine purred to life, and they were moving. Evelyn tried to scream again, but the bag was pressed tight against her mouth with every breath. She could taste canvas and rain and her own terror. Her hands were still behind her back, wrists held together by a grip like iron. The car turned sharply, and she fell sideways into someone's shoulder. Stop struggling, a voice said close to her ear. Not threatening, just tired. You'll only hurt yourself. She struggled anyway, thrashed and twisted until her wrists were raw and her lungs were burning, and she couldn't tell anymore if the wetness on her face was rain or tears or both. The car kept moving, taking turn after turn until she'd lost all sense of direction. They could be anywhere. Could be heading toward the outskirts of Milan, or into the center of the city, or all the way to fucking Switzerland, for all she knew. How long? The tired voice asked. 20 minutes. A different voice, from the front seat. The holding facility in Rho. Her father? Still missing. Aldo's team swept his office and the apartment in Como. Nothing. So we're sitting on her until he surfaces or until the boss decides what to do with her. The hands on her wrists shifted slightly. Could be worse, kid. Could be a lot worse. Evelyn made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't soaked in panic. Could be worse. She'd been kidnapped off the street by men working for someone her father owed 15 million euros. She was in the back of a car with a bag over her head being taken to a holding facility in an industrial district where people definitely got murdered and dissolved in acid or whatever the fuck organized criminals did to inconvenient problems. How exactly could this be worse? The car finally stopped. Doors opened, and she was pulled out into rain that had intensified into a proper downpour. She stumbled and would have fallen if the hands hadn't steadied her. They walked her forward. She counted 43 steps across what felt like gravel, then up a short ramp where the sound of the rain became muffled, inside somewhere. A door clanged shut behind them. Straight ahead. Careful, there's a step down. She missed it anyway and pitched forward, catching herself against a wall that felt like concrete. The hands guided her to the left, through another doorway, and then finally, the bag was pulled off her head. Evelyn blinked against sudden fluorescent brightness. She was in a small room with cinder block walls painted industrial beige. No windows. One metal door with a heavy lock. A cot against one wall with a thin mattress and a folded blanket. A bucket in the corner that she desperately hoped wasn't meant to serve as a toilet. The three men stood between her and the door. Up close, in the harsh light, they looked almost ordinary. The big one who'd grabbed her first had a wedding ring. The tired-voiced one had a coffee stain on his shirt collar. The third one, younger than the others, wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "You'll stay here," the big one said. "Someone will bring you food and water. Don't try to leave. Don't try to signal for help. Don't do anything stupid. Understand?" Evelyn's voice came out as a whisper. "What are you going to do to me?" "Nothing, if your father cooperates. If he doesn't," he shrugged. "That's above my pay grade. But for what it's worth, I hope he's smart enough to make a deal. You seem like a nice kid." They left. The lock turned with a heavy metallic click that sounded like the end of the world. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room for a long time, dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor, trying to make her brain work. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. 3 hours ago, she'd been sketching an old man drinking espresso and worrying about a late essay. People didn't just get kidnapped off the street in Milan in 2024. That was something that happened in movies, in the kind of pulpy thrillers she sometimes read on the train and always found vaguely ridiculous. Except it had happened. Was happening. Was going to keep happening until her father somehow produced 15 million euros or until these people decided she wasn't worth keeping alive. Her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the concrete and pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself. She was shaking, from cold, from fear, from the delayed shock of the last 30 minutes catching up all at once. Her phone was gone. Probably still in her pocket when they'd grabbed her, but they must have taken it. No way to call for help. No way to reach her father or Anna or anyone who might wonder where she'd gone. No one would even know she was missing until tomorrow when she didn't show up for her morning lecture. And even then, Professor Martelli would just assume she was skipping class like half the students did. Anna might text her this weekend, might get worried if she didn't respond, might eventually call, but by then it would be too late. By then, Evelyn realized with a clarity that made her stomach heave, she could already be dead. She pressed her face against her knees and tried very hard not to throw up. Time became strange in the room with no windows. Someone brought her food, a paper plate with a sandwich and an apple, a bottle of water. She didn't touch it. Later, an hour, 3 hours, someone else came to take the bucket and replace it with an empty one. Neither of them spoke to her. She didn't speak to them. She tried to sleep and couldn't. Lay on the cot staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and listening to sounds from somewhere beyond the door. Footsteps, muffled voices. Once what might have been a car engine. She thought about her father and couldn't reconcile the man she knew with the one these people described. Paolo Rossi, who cried at operas and bought her gelato every Sunday and had never in 22 years shown the slightest indication that he was involved in anything more criminal than occasionally parking in loading zones. Money laundering, pharmaceuticals, 15 million euros. She'd always known he had money, more than you'd expect from someone who claimed to work in corporate consulting. The apartment in Como that he said was an investment property. The way he'd paid her university tuition in cash, always cash, counted out in neat stacks of 50-euro notes. His insistence that she never get a credit card in her own name, never sign a lease, never create a paper trail that connected her to his finances. She thought he was just paranoid, old-fashioned, maybe a little bit of a control freak. She'd been so fucking naive. The door opened again, and this time it was someone new. A woman in her 50s wearing a burgundy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked like someone's aunt, the kind who remembered birthdays and baked elaborate cakes. She pulled a folding chair from against the wall, set it up facing the cot, and sat down with perfect posture. Evelyn, how are you feeling? The question was so absurd that Evelyn almost laughed. How do you think I'm feeling? Frightened, confused, probably angry. The woman opened her portfolio and took out a tablet. All perfectly reasonable responses. I'm here to explain your situation and discuss your options. My options. Evelyn pushed herself upright on the cot. You mean whether I want to be murdered quickly or slowly? No one wants to murder you. The woman's voice was patient, like she was explaining something to a difficult child. You're an asset, not a target. Your father owes our organization a substantial debt. Until he pays it, you serve as collateral to ensure his cooperation. And if he can't pay, then we'll need to recoup our losses through other means. She tapped something on the tablet. You're educated, well-spoken, attractive. Those qualities have value in certain markets. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What markets? The woman looked up, and her eyes were not unkind, just matter of fact. There are people who pay considerable amounts for companionship, long-term arrangements with young women of good background. It's not ideal, I understand, but it's better than the alternatives. Evelyn's mouth had gone completely dry. You're talking about selling me. I'm talking about a contractual placement that would satisfy your father's debt and provide you with a comfortable life. Many women in your position would consider themselves fortunate. Go to hell, the woman sighed. I'm trying to help you understand your reality, Evelyn. Your father has made choices that placed you in this situation. We didn't create these circumstances. We're simply responding to them. And between you and me? She leaned forward slightly. The men who attend these auctions are generally wealthy, educated, civilized. They're looking for companions, not victims. Some of the arrangements even include contracts with specific terms, protections, exit clauses after a certain number of years. It's not the life you planned, but it could be far worse. When? Evelyn's voice came out as a whisper. The next auction is in 5 days, Monaco. Very exclusive, very discreet. We'll need to prepare you. Appropriate clothing, some basic instruction on etiquette and expectations. If you cooperate, the process will be much more pleasant for everyone involved. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I'll have someone bring you dinner and some fresh clothes. Try to get some rest. The next few days will be difficult, but they'll be easier if you don't fight what's coming. The door closed. The lock turned. Evelyn sat very still for a long time, processing what she'd just been told. They were going to put her in an auction. Like furniture, like livestock. We're going to parade her in front of wealthy men who would bid on the privilege of owning her for how long? Years? Forever? She thought about fighting, thought about refusing to cooperate, making herself difficult, impossible to sell. But they'd just drug her, she realized, or beat her into submission, or kill her and cut their losses. She had no leverage, no power, nothing but her own compliance to trade. The sandwich from earlier was still on the floor where she'd left it. She picked it up and ate it mechanically, not tasting anything, just forcing herself to swallow because she needed to stay strong, stay sharp, stay ready for any chance to escape that might present itself. None came. The next 4 days blurred together in a nightmare routine of small humiliations and careful preparations. They moved her to a different room, larger, with an actual bed and a private bathroom, almost like a hotel room if you ignored the locks on the outside of the door. The woman in burgundy returned with others, a stylist who cut and colored her hair, a beautician who waxed and plucked and buffed until Evelyn's skin felt raw, a seamstress who took measurements and returned with dresses she'd never have chosen for herself. On the 3rd day, they brought a doctor. He examined her with clinical detachment, drew blood, asked invasive questions about her medical history. She's healthy, he told the woman afterward, like Evelyn wasn't even in the room. No diseases, no drugs, no prior pregnancies, good bone structure. She'll present well. Present well. Like a show dog. That night, Evelyn cried for the first time since they'd taken her, pressed her face into the pillow, and sobbed until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and she couldn't cry anymore. When she was done, she got up, washed her face, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The girl looking back was a stranger, hair styled in soft waves that framed her face, skin glowing from expensive products. Even without makeup, she looked polished, refined, like someone who belonged at fancy parties and exclusive events, like someone worth buying. On the morning of the 5th day, they came for her at dawn. The woman in burgundy brought the dress, midnight blue silk that clung to curves Evelyn had never thought much about, with a neckline that showed just enough skin to be suggestive without being vulgar. Shoes with heels high enough to make walking a careful balance. Diamond earrings that were probably worth more than her entire education. "You look beautiful," the woman said, and actually sounded like she meant it. "Remember what we discussed. Shoulders back, chin up, smile if you can manage it. Don't speak unless someone speaks to you first. Don't make eye contact with the bidders. Just stand where you're told and let them see what they're buying." Evelyn wanted to spit in her face. Instead, she nodded. They drove for hours. She lost track of how many, drifting in and out of an exhausted stupor in the back of another Mercedes with tinted windows. When they finally stopped and the door opened, Mediterranean sunlight poured in, so bright after days of artificial lighting that it hurt to breathe. Monaco. She could smell the sea. The venue was underground, accessible through what looked like a service entrance to a luxury hotel. Down a marble staircase, through corridors decorated with art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, into a large room set up like a theater, rows of seats facing a raised stage, soft lighting that managed to be both elegant and vaguely sinister, and everywhere, men in expensive suits wearing masks, not costume masks. These were subtle, elegant things that covered just enough of their faces to provide anonymity while still allowing them to drink the champagne being passed around by silent servers. Evelyn counted maybe 40 people in the room, all men except for the servers and the handful of women who looked like they worked for the organization running this event. She wasn't the only one being sold tonight. There were 5 other girls visible in a holding area to the side of the stage, all young, all beautiful in that same polished, prepared way. One of them was crying silently, tears tracking through her makeup. Another stared at nothing with eyes like broken glass. "You're fourth," the woman in burgundy murmured. "When they call your number, walk to center stage and turn slowly. Don't rush. Don't slouch. Show them what they're considering." Evelyn's number was 11. It was written on a small card she was meant to hold, like she was applying for a fucking job. The auction started. The first girl went for 18 million euros to a man in the third row who barely looked up from his phone while bidding. The second went for 22 million after a brief competition between 2 bidders that ended when one of them shrugged and sat down. The third, the one who'd been crying, went for 15 million to someone who bid once and then left immediately, apparently having gotten what he came for. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She walked onto the stage on legs that felt like water. The lights were brighter here, hot against her skin. Beyond them, the audience was mostly shadows, masked faces and glinting glasses, and the soft murmur of wealth that didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. "Number 11, the auctioneer announced in French-accented English. 22 years old, university educated, fluent in Italian and English, no medical issues, no prior contracts. Shall we start the bidding at 10 million euros? A paddle raised in the back, then another. The numbers climbed. 12 million, 15 million, 18 million. Evelyn turned slowly like they'd instructed and felt dozens of eyes evaluating her like merchandise, like meat. 20 million, 22 million, 25 million. The bidding slowed, seemed to settle between 2 men, one in the front row wearing a silver mask, another somewhere in the middle rows that she couldn't see clearly. 28 million from the silver mask. A pause. Then a voice from the back of the room, deep and absolutely certain. 32 million. The room went silent. Every head turned. Evelyn couldn't see him clearly through the lights, but she saw movement. Someone standing, someone tall and broad-shouldered, wearing black that made him almost invisible in the shadows. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose slightly. 32 million euros from the gentleman in black. Do I hear 33? The silver mask shook his head and sat down. The other bidder had already left. 32 million going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that split Evelyn's world in 2. Sold to the gentleman in black for 32 million euros. The room erupted in polite applause. Evelyn stood frozen on the stage, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 32 million. Someone had just paid 32 million euros for her. "Come along," the woman in burgundy appeared at her elbow, guiding her off the stage. "Your buyer will finalize the transaction, and then you'll be transferred to his custody." Who is he? Evelyn's voice sounded strange in her own ears. That information is confidential. You'll learn what he wants you to know. They led her to a small room off the main hall where she sat in the midnight blue dress and diamond earrings, waiting to meet the man who'd purchased her like she was a painting or a car or a particularly expensive bottle of wine. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them in her lap and tried to breathe. The door opened. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. He'd removed the mask, and she saw a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so hard. Sharp features, dark eyes that showed absolutely nothing, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His suit was perfectly tailored, probably cost more than her entire education. He wore authority like some men wore cologne. He looked at her for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was the same one that had bid 32 million with such absolute certainty. My name is Dominic Veriz. As of tonight, you belong to me. Do you understand? Evelyn lifted her chin and met his eyes. I understand that you paid money for something you'll never actually own. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement? It was gone too quickly to tell. We'll see, he said. Come, we're leaving. He turned and walked out, clearly expecting her to follow. The woman in burgundy gave her a gentle push. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, dear. Evelyn stood, smoothed the silk dress with trembling hands, and followed the man who'd bought her out into the Monaco night, where a black car with tinted windows was waiting to take her somewhere she couldn't imagine. Whatever was coming next, she knew with absolute certainty that her life as Evelyn Rossi, literature student, bookstore clerk, girl who sketched strangers in coffee shops, was over. And the man who'd ended it was currently holding open the car door, waiting with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Because he did. Because she was his now. Because 32 million euros had just rewritten her entire future, and there was nothing she could do but step into that car and let it carry her toward whatever nightmare came next. The car smelled like leather, and something else Evelyn couldn't identify. Expensive cologne, maybe, or just the particular scent of wealth. Dominic sat across from her in the spacious back seat, separated by enough distance that they weren't touching, but close enough that she could feel the weight of his presence. He'd said nothing since they'd left the venue, just made a phone call in rapid Italian, too quiet for her to catch more than fragments. She stared out the window as Monaco blurred past, casino lights, yacht masts piercing the dark sky, streets that cost more per square meter than most people earned in a year. The driver took them along the coast road, and for one wild moment Evelyn considered throwing herself from the moving vehicle. But the doors were locked, and even if they weren't, what then? Run through Monaco in a silk dress and heels, screaming for help from people who'd paid thousands of euros just to sit in the same room where girls were auctioned like cattle? Dominic ended his call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. When he spoke, his voice was measured, almost conversational. Are you going to try to escape? Evelyn turned from the window. Would it matter if I did? It would be inconvenient and unsuccessful. He studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. But I'm curious whether you're foolish enough to try. I'm curious whether you think 32 million euros gives you the right to own another human being. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the first crack in that perfect control. I think 32 million euros purchased your father's debt and your cooperation. What happens next depends entirely on how reasonable you choose to be. Reasonable. The word tasted bitter. Is that what you call this? Reasonable? I call it business. Your father stole from people who don't forgive theft. The debt had to be paid one way or another. This way, at least you're alive. For how long? He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached forward and pressed a button on the console between them. A partition slid up, separating them from the driver. The sudden privacy made Evelyn's skin crawl. We need to establish some ground rules, Dominic said. I'm not interested in breaking you or terrorizing you or whatever lurid scenario you've constructed in your mind. I have other priorities, and frankly, managing a hysterical captive doesn't rank among them. Then let me go. No. Simple. Final. Like he was declining an offer of coffee. But I can make this easier for both of us if you listen. You'll live in my home. You'll have your own room, your own space. You won't be locked up or chained or subjected to... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Anything you haven't explicitly agreed to. Evelyn laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut glass. You bought me at an auction, and you're talking about consent? I'm talking about not being a monster. His voice hardened. There's a difference between owning your father's debt and treating you like property. I suggest you learn to recognize it. And if I don't want to be in your home, if I don't want anything to do with you, then you'll find yourself back in the hands of the people who organized that auction. And I promise you, they're far less concerned with your comfort than I am. He leaned back, and the motion reminded her of a predator relaxing after securing its prey. Your father is still missing. The organization is still owed money. Right now, the only thing keeping you from being sold again, possibly to someone far worse than me, is the fact that I paid an obscene amount to claim first rights. Don't make me regret that investment. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. You're a real humanitarian. I'm a realist, and if you have any sense, you'll be one too. He pulled out his phone again, effectively ending the conversation. We'll arrive in approximately 3 hours. I suggest you rest. Rest, as if she could sleep while hurtling through the night toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. But she turned back to the window anyway, because looking at him made her want to scream or cry or both, and she'd be damned if she gave him the satisfaction. The Mediterranean coastline gave way to mountain roads, and the mountain roads gave way to highways cutting through darkness. Evelyn must have dozed despite herself, because she jolted awake to find the car pulling through massive iron gates onto a private drive. The property was enormous. She caught glimpses of manicured gardens, stone walls, towering cypress trees black against a sky just beginning to lighten with dawn. The house appeared at the end of the drive, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, 3 stories of pale stone and dark windows perched on what looked like the edge of a cliff. Through gaps in the trees, she could see the sea far below, waves crashing white against rocks, beautiful and completely isolated. Of course. The car stopped at the entrance. The driver opened Dominic's door first, then circled around to hers. She stepped out into cool pre-dawn air that smelled like salt and rosemary, her heels clicking against cobblestones. Dominic was already moving toward the entrance, clearly expecting her to follow. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior. Marble floors, high ceilings, artwork that belonged in museums. A woman in her 60s appeared from somewhere in the depths of the house, gray hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a simple black dress and an expression of professional neutrality. "This is Senora Costa," Dominic said without slowing his stride. "She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her." Senora Costa gave Evelyn a brief, assessing look that revealed nothing. "Welcome, Signorina. Would you like some breakfast?" The kindness in her voice, or maybe just the normalcy of the question, made Evelyn's throat tight. "No, thank you." "Show her to the East Wing," Dominic told Senora Costa. "Make sure she has everything she needs." He turned to Evelyn. "We'll talk more tomorrow. For now, I suggest you settle in and try not to do anything stupid like attempting to leave the property. The cliffs are dangerous, the security system is comprehensive, and the nearest town is 15 kilometers away." He walked off down a corridor, and Evelyn found herself alone with the housekeeper. Senora Costa's expression softened slightly. "Come, child. You must be exhausted." The East Wing was accessed through a series of hallways that Evelyn tried and failed to memorize. Her room was larger than her entire apartment in Milan had been. A 4-poster bed with white linens, French doors opening onto a balcony with an iron railing, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. Everything was beautiful and expensive and felt like a very elegant cage. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Senora Costa said, opening doors to reveal more garments than Evelyn had owned in her entire life. "All your size. If you need anything else, there's a phone by the bed. Just press one and someone will answer." "How long have you worked for him?" Evelyn heard herself ask. The housekeeper's face closed slightly. 20 years, Signorina." "And you're okay with this? With him buying women?" Senora Costa smoothed her apron, not meeting Evelyn's eyes. "It's not my place to judge Senor Verese's decisions. He's always been fair with me and mine." She moved toward the door. "Try to get some rest. Things often look better in daylight." She left, and the lock didn't click. Evelyn checked anyway, and the door opened easily. So she wasn't a prisoner in her room, at least, just a prisoner in a massive compound on the edge of a cliff with no way to escape and nowhere to go, even if she could. She walked to the French doors and opened them, stepping onto the balcony. The sun was rising now, painting the sea gold and pink. It was stunningly beautiful, and she hated it. Hated the perfect view and the perfect room and the perfectly thoughtful provision of clothes in her exact size. Like this was all completely normal, like she was a guest instead of property. Evelyn gripped the iron railing and looked down. 3 stories to the ground, and beyond that, the cliff edge maybe 50 meters away. Could she climb down? Probably break her neck trying. Could she somehow signal for help? To who? Planes passing overhead? Fishing boats in the distant water? I wouldn't recommend it. She spun around. Dominic stood in the doorway to her room, still wearing his suit from the auction, looking like he hadn't slept at all. The fall wouldn't kill you, but the injuries would be severe, and then you'd be trapped here and in a cast. Get out of my room. It's my house, my room. I'm allowing you to use it. He stepped onto the balcony, and Evelyn instinctively backed against the railing. He noticed and stopped. I'm not going to hurt you, Evelyn. You keep saying that like it means something, like buying a person doesn't count as hurting them. I paid off your father's debt, kept you from being sold to someone who might actually abuse you, brought you to a place where you'll be safe, fed, and treated with basic human dignity. Yes, you're here against your will, but don't pretend every alternative wouldn't have been worse. So I should be grateful. Her voice rose. I should thank you for ruining my life? Your father ruined your life the moment he decided to steal from Cristoforo Benedetti. Dominic's tone was flat. I'm just the one dealing with the aftermath. The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but the way he said it, with a weight that suggested significance, made her pause. Who? The man your father took 15 million euros from. The man who would have had you killed if I hadn't intervened. He moved to the other side of the balcony, keeping distance between them. Benedetti runs most of the organized crime in northern Italy. He's not known for mercy or patience. When your father disappeared, Benedetti's people grabbed you as leverage. When your father stayed disappeared, they decided to recoup their losses by selling you. Simple economics. And you? Evelyn demanded. What do you run? How do you have the kind of money to throw 32 million at an auction? That's not your concern. I think it became my concern when you bought me like a fucking handbag. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Watch your tone. Or what? You'll send me back? Do it. I'd rather take my chances with Benedetti than spend another minute pretending this is anything other than slavery dressed up in expensive silk. They stared at each other across the balcony, and Evelyn could see him fighting for control. His jaw worked. His hands flexed at his sides. Then he turned away, gripping the railing and looking out at the sea. My business is varied, he said finally. Import-export mostly. Some investments. I operate in markets that aren't entirely legal, but also aren't violent. I don't deal drugs, I don't traffic weapons, and I don't hurt women. But I do move money for people who do all those things, which makes me complicit enough that I have to be careful. Very careful. And one way to stay careful is to pay attention to who owes what to whom. You knew about my father. I knew Benedetti was owed money by someone in Milan. I knew he was getting impatient. When I heard about the auction, I made inquiries. Found out who you were. Decided to acquire you before someone worse did. He looked back at her. Call it a long-term investment. The casual way he said it made her stomach turn. Investment in what? That depends on you. He pushed off the railing. I'm offering you a choice, Evelyn. You can fight this every day, make yourself miserable, and eventually exhaust both of us to the point where I have no choice but to find other arrangements. Or you can accept your situation, make the best of it, and discover that I'm not the villain you want me to be. Make the best of being owned by a criminal. Make the best of being protected by someone who has the resources to keep you safe and the inclination not to abuse you. It's not ideal, but it's survivable. He moved toward the door. Think about it. We'll talk again when you've had time to adjust. I'll never adjust to this. He paused in the doorway. People adjust to a lot of things they swore they never would. You'd be surprised what you can live with when the alternative is dying. He left, and this time Evelyn did hear the soft click of the outer door to the suite. Not locked, she discovered when she checked. Just closed. She was alone in a room that was probably worth more than everything she'd ever owned combined, wearing a wrinkled silk dress that had cost more than a semester's tuition, trying to process a conversation that had somehow made everything worse. An investment. A long-term investment. What the hell did that even mean? She peeled off the dress, left it in a heap on the floor, and stood in the massive bathroom staring at herself in the mirror. The girl looking back had perfectly styled hair and skin that still glowed from expensive treatments and eyes that were completely empty. She looked like someone who belonged in a place like this, someone elegant and kept and utterly without agency. Evelyn turned on the shower as hot as it would go and stood under the spray until her skin turned red and the water finally ran cold. When she got out, she found a robe hanging on the back of the door, thick, white, soft as a cloud. She wrapped herself in it and walked back into the bedroom, where someone had been while she showered. The silk dress was gone. Fresh clothes were laid out on the bed, simple things, jeans and a sweater, undergarments still in their packaging. A tray with food had appeared on the small table by the window. She ignored the food and climbed into bed, pulling the covers over her head like she was a child hiding from monsters. Except the monsters were real, and they owned oceanfront fortresses, and they spoke in calm, reasonable voices about ownership and investment while destroying lives with the casual certainty of men who'd never been told no. Evelyn must have slept eventually because she woke to afternoon light slanting through the French doors and the smell of something cooking. The tray of breakfast food was gone, replaced by lunch, soup, bread, fruit, a small pot of tea. She ate mechanically, surprised by how hungry she was, and then spent an hour exploring the suite. 3 rooms total, the bedroom, the bathroom, and a sitting area with bookshelves lined with titles in Italian, English, and French. Someone had stocked them carefully. Literary fiction, poetry, art books, exactly the kinds of things a literature student might want. The thoughtfulness of it made her irrationally angry. Like providing her favorite genres of books could somehow make up for the fact that she was being held prisoner. She was examining a first edition Calvino when someone knocked on the outer door. Before she could respond, it opened and Signora Costa appeared with an armful of linens. "Good, you're awake. Did you eat?" "Yes, thank you." The housekeeper nodded approval and began efficiently changing the bedding, even though it looked perfectly clean. "Signor Varese asked me to tell you that dinner is at 8. He expects you to join him." "And if I don't want to?" "Then you'll go hungry and insult the cook who's been preparing your favorites all day." Signora Costa smoothed a pillowcase with practiced hands. "It's just dinner, child, not an execution." "How would you know what my favorites are?" Signor Varese provided a list. Apparently he had you researched quite thoroughly before the auction. She saw Evelyn's expression and added more gently, "He's trying in his way. That's more than most men in his position would bother with." "I'm supposed to be grateful that my captor did his homework?" "You're supposed to recognize that you're safer here than you would be anywhere else, given your circumstances. That man paid a fortune for you, and not for the reasons you think." Signora Costa finished with the bed and gathered the used linens. "But if you want to understand what he actually wants, you'll have to talk to him. Fighting won't get you answers." She left, and Evelyn was alone again, with her anger and confusion and the growing uncomfortable suspicion that nothing about this situation made sense. Why bid 32 million euros for a literature student with no connections and no particular skills? Why provide her with books and privacy and a housekeeper who spoke to her like an actual human being instead of property? What the hell was Dominic Varese's endgame? At 7:30, Evelyn found herself standing in front of the wardrobe, trying to decide if choosing what to wear to dinner counted as cooperation or just basic self-preservation. She settled on the jeans and sweater that had been laid out earlier, a small rebellion in refusing to dress up for him. Then she attempted to navigate the maze of hallways back to the main part of the house. She got lost twice before finding a staircase that looked familiar. At the bottom, she encountered a man in his 30s wearing a shoulder holster and an expression of professional boredom. "Dining room's that way," he said, pointing. "Signor Varese is expecting you." Security. Of course there was security. Probably all over the property, watching every move she made. The thought made her skin crawl. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, An intimate space with a table that could seat maybe 12 but was currently set for 2. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the cliff and the sea beyond, where the sun was setting in streaks of orange and purple. Dominic stood by those windows with a glass of wine, wearing dark slacks and a white shirt open at the collar. He looked more relaxed than he had this morning, or maybe just tired. "You came," he said, and sounded genuinely surprised. "Your housekeeper said the cook was making my favorites. I was curious how you knew what those were." "I had you investigated after I learned about the auction. The restaurant you worked at part-time was very forthcoming about your usual orders." He gestured to the table. "Please, sit." Evelyn sat, mostly because standing felt more confrontational and she was still trying to figure out what game he was playing. Dominic took the chair across from her, close enough to talk comfortably, far enough to not feel crowded. A man appeared from what must be the kitchen carrying plates. Risotto alla Milanese, perfectly golden, with the kind of saffron richness Evelyn had only ever tasted at expensive restaurants she couldn't afford. "Wine?" Dominic offered, reaching for a bottle. "Are you trying to get me drunk?" "I'm trying to have a civil dinner. If that requires alcohol, I'm happy to provide it." He poured himself a glass when she didn't answer. "How are you settling in?" "I'm a prisoner in a mansion on a cliff. How do you think I'm settling in?" "I think you're angry and frightened and looking for ways to maintain some sense of control, all perfectly reasonable." He took a sip of wine. "But I'm asking if the room is comfortable, if you have everything you need, if there's anything I can provide that would make this easier." "You could let me go." "Anything else?" Evelyn poked at the risotto with her fork. It looked perfect, probably tasted perfect. She hated that he'd somehow known this was her favorite, hated that he'd cared enough to have it made, hated the whole performance of civilized captivity. "Why am I here, Dominic? Really? What do you actually want from me?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning his wine glass between his fingers. "Insurance," he said finally. "Against what?" "Against being alone." He met her eyes. "I'm 45 years old. I've spent the last 25 years building an empire that operates in the spaces between legal and illegal, always careful, always moving, always watching my back. I have money, power, properties all over Europe. I have men who work for me and associates who respect me and enemies who fear me. What I don't have is anyone who gives a damn whether I live or die for reasons that aren't purely financial." "So you bought someone to care about you?" Evelyn couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. "That's not how it works." "I bought someone who might eventually choose to stay. Someone intelligent enough to understand the life I lead and brave enough to survive in it. Someone I won't have to lie to about what I am." He leaned back. "You're right that it can't be forced, but proximity, time, shared experiences, those things create bonds whether we want them to or not." "That's the most delusional thing I've ever heard." "Is it? You've been here less than a day and you already came to dinner, already ate food I had prepared for you, already engaged in conversation instead of barricading yourself in your room. The human need for connection is powerful, Evelyn. Even when we're furious, even when we're scared, we still seek it out. I came to dinner because I was hungry. I'm talking to you because I want to understand what kind of monster buys a person and calls it insurance. The kind who's self-aware enough to know that money can't buy genuine human connection, but desperate enough to try anyway." His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a business strategy. "I could have bid on any of those girls. I chose you because your file suggested intelligence, education, strength, qualities that might translate into someone worth knowing. Was I wrong?" The question hung between them, and Evelyn didn't know how to answer it. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. She was strong, she was intelligent. But using those qualities to justify purchasing her like livestock was so fundamentally twisted that she couldn't find words adequate to express her revulsion. "Eat," Dominic said quietly. "The food's getting cold, and Sophia really did go to considerable trouble." Evelyn ate. Hated herself a little for how good it tasted, for how her body relaxed slightly with warm food in her stomach and wine. She'd accepted a glass after all, taking the edge off her fear. Across the table, Dominic ate with the focused efficiency of someone who viewed meals as fuel rather than pleasure. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "You keep me here as your, what? Companion, decoration, pet? You live here. You have freedom within the property. the library, the gardens, the beach. If you're careful of the path down the cliff, you eat, sleep, read, do whatever you need to do to stay sane, and occasionally you have dinner with me. We talk, we get to know each other. We see what develops. And if nothing develops, if I continue to hate you for the rest of my life, then we'll be two people sharing a very large house in extremely uncomfortable silence. He finished his wine. But I don't think that's what will happen. I think you'll eventually realize that I'm the only person in the world right now who's invested in keeping you alive and well. And I think survival instinct will evolve into something more complex, given enough time. You're describing Stockholm Syndrome. I'm describing adaptation. Human beings are remarkably good at it. Evelyn pushed her plate away, appetite gone. I want to call my friend Anna, let her know I'm alive. No. Why not? I'm not going to tell her where I am or who I'm with. I just want her to know I wasn't murdered. Because your friend will go to the police, who will investigate, and that investigation will lead to questions I don't want asked. Dominic stood. I'm sorry, but your old life is over. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. Go to hell. I'm already there. He walked to the door, then paused. There's a library on the second floor, east wing, third door on the left. You're welcome to use it any time. And if you want to go outside tomorrow, tell Senora Costa. She'll arrange for one of the security team to accompany you. I don't want a babysitter. Then you'll stay inside, your choice. He left without waiting for a response. Evelyn sat alone in the dining room as the sun finished setting and the sky turned dark. Someone came to clear the plates. A young woman who smiled nervously and wouldn't meet her eyes. After she was gone, Evelyn walked to the windows and looked out at the sea, barely visible now except where moonlight caught the waves. She was trapped. Truly, completely trapped in a situation that made no sense and offered no escape. And the man holding her captive seemed to genuinely believe that she'd eventually, fall in love with him? Accept this twisted arrangement as normal? Choose to stay in a gilded cage because the alternative was worse? The worst part was that he might be right about that last one. Where could she go even if she escaped? Back to Milan, where Benedetti's people would find her in a day? To the police, who'd want to know details about her father's crimes that she didn't have? To Anna, putting her friend in danger just by association? Dominic had been smart. Ruthlessly, efficiently smart. He'd removed every option except the one where she stayed here, under his control, slowly being worn down by proximity and time and the basic human need for connection he'd so casually identified. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She wouldn't give him what he wanted, wouldn't become what he expected, would find a way out of this even if it took months or years or the rest of her miserable life. But tonight, exhausted and alone and so far from anything familiar, it felt like being on another planet. She allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her spine, and went to find the library Dominic had mentioned. If she was going to be stuck here, she might as well have something to read while she plotted her escape. The library was exactly where Dominic said it would be, and walking into it felt like stepping into someone's private obsession. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed so tightly that some books were stacked horizontally on top of the vertical rows. A ladder on rails provided access to the higher shelves. Leather chairs clustered around a fireplace that still held the ashes of a recent fire. The 4th wall was all windows, offering the same dramatic view of the sea that seemed to be this house's signature feature. Evelyn ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in the dim light from a single lamp someone had left burning. Philosophy, history, classic literature in multiple languages, and an entire section devoted to what looked like crime novels and thrillers. The collection of someone who read voraciously and without particular pattern, Dostoevsky next to Chandler, Machiavelli beside a dog-eared paperback of The Godfather. She pulled out a collection of Pavet's poems and settled into one of the leather chairs, curling her legs underneath her. The Italian felt like home in a way nothing else in this house did. She read until her eyes burned and the words started blurring together, then dozed off with the book open in her lap. She woke to someone draping a blanket over her shoulders. Her eyes flew open to find Dominic standing there, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Cedar, and something darker she still couldn't identify. "It's 3 a.m, he said quietly. "You should go to bed." Evelyn jerked away from him, the blanket falling to the floor. Don't touch me. I was trying to keep you from freezing. The heat turns down at night. He picked up the fallen blanket and draped it over the arm of the chair, but noted, no touching. What are you doing here? I own the house. I'm allowed to be in my own library. He moved to the shelves and pulled down a book seemingly at random. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd read for a while. Didn't expect to find you here. I'll leave. Don't. He settled into the chair across from her, and in the lamplight he looked older than he had at dinner. Tired, almost human. Stay. Read. We don't have to talk. Evelyn should have left. Should have grabbed her book and retreated to her room and maintained every possible boundary. Instead, she found herself pulling the blanket around her shoulders and reopening the pavis. Dominic did the same with his book, something in English, she couldn't see the title. For a while, the only sound was the occasional turn of a page and the wind outside the windows. Why crime novels? She asked finally, surprising herself. He looked up. What? You have half a shelf of Italian literature and 10 feet of crime fiction. Seems like an odd ratio for someone who lives it. Maybe that's exactly why. See how other people imagine it. The romanticized version where detectives are heroes and criminals have codes of honor. He closed his book, keeping one finger between the pages. Reality is messier, less dramatic, mostly just moving numbers around and making sure the right people get paid the right amounts at the right times. That's what you do? Move numbers around? Among other things, I facilitate transactions that need to happen outside traditional banking systems. Someone in Paris needs to pay someone in Istanbul without any government noticing. I make that possible. Someone needs to convert physical assets into digital currency without questions. I have people for that. It's boring work, mostly. Spreadsheets and encrypted calls and very occasional moments of actual danger. Sounds thrilling. Such a ghost of a smile crossed his face. It pays well. And it keeps me alive, which is more than I can say for people who get into the flashier aspects of this life. Drugs, weapons, violence, that's where bodies pile up. I prefer to stay in the background. Yet you bought a person at an auction. Yet I bought you at an auction, he corrected. First time. Probably last time. Not really my usual operating procedure. Why break pattern for me? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, because I saw your file and recognized something. You were studying Calvino when they grabbed you. Had a notebook full of observations about narrative structure and unreliable narrators. Your bookshelf in Milan was mostly Italian writers, Moravia, Eco, Ferrante. You worked part-time at a bookstore and spent your tips on first editions you couldn't afford. You're describing someone who likes books. That's not particularly unique. You're describing someone who lives in stories because reality isn't enough. Someone who sees the world as a series of narratives to be analyzed and understood. That's rare. Especially in my world where most people just see angles and advantages and who owes what to whom. He leaned forward slightly. I thought maybe someone like that could understand that people contain multitudes, that someone can be both a criminal and a person who loves pavés, that nothing is as simple as hero and villain. You want me to see you as complicated instead of just bad? I want you to see me as human. It's a low bar, but I'll take it. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around herself. You're still holding me prisoner. I know. He opened his book again, effectively ending the conversation. I'm not asking you to forgive it, just to recognize that I'm trying not to be worse than I have to be. They read in silence until dawn started lightening the windows. Evelyn dozed off again, and when she woke, Dominic was gone and someone had brought her a tray with coffee and pastries. A note in precise handwriting said, breakfast. You should eat something before Signora Costa stages an intervention. D. The casualness of it, the thoughtfulness and the humor and the assumption of continued interaction made her irrationally angry all over again. She ate the pastries anyway, because her body needed fuel and starving herself wouldn't hurt anyone but her. Then she returned to her room, showered, and spent the rest of the morning staring out the French doors at the sea. Around noon, Signora Costa appeared with fresh towels and a carefully neutral expression. Signor Varese wanted me to tell you that if you'd like to walk the gardens this afternoon, Marco will accompany you. He's the least chatty of the security team. I don't want a guard. Then stay inside. Those are your options. The housekeeper set the towels on a shelf with precision that suggested she'd performed this exact motion thousands of times. For what it's worth, Marco won't bother you. He'll just make sure you don't fall off a cliff or try something foolish. Evelyn spent another hour wrestling with pride versus the desperate need to be outside, to breathe air that didn't smell like expensive furniture, and her own fear. Pride lost. She found Senora Costa in the kitchen and said, "Fine, I'll take the guard." Marco turned out to be the man she'd encountered by the staircase the previous evening, early 30s, built like someone who spent a lot of time in a gym, with a face that suggested he'd seen things that had burned out any capacity for surprise. He nodded when she appeared and fell into step about 3 paces behind her as she headed for the door. "Stay on the paths," he said. His English had a thick Roman accent. The cliff edges are unstable in places. The gardens were extensive and clearly maintained by someone with both skill and resources. Gravel paths wound through beds of rosemary and lavender, past olive trees and climbing roses just starting their autumn bloom. Beyond the formal gardens, the landscape became wilder, native Mediterranean plants clinging to rocky soil, twisted cypress trees that had been shaped by decades of wind. The path led toward the cliff edge, where a stone wall about waist-high provided the only barrier between the gardens and a 100-meter drop to the sea. Evelyn walked to the wall and looked down. The waves crashed against black rocks, sending up spray that caught the afternoon light. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely unsurvivable. Even if she could somehow climb down without falling, even if she could make it to the water, then what? Swim to the nearest town? She'd be dead from exposure before she made it a kilometer. "Don't even think about it," Marco said from his position several meters back. "Current's too strong. You'd drown before you got past the rocks." "I'm just looking." Everyone just looks at first. He lit a cigarette, clearly settling in for a long watch. Then they start calculating angles and distances. Then they convince themselves they're athletic enough to make it work. They're not. No one is. Has anyone tried? Before my time, maybe. Not since I've been here. He exhaled smoke. "Look, I get paid to keep you safe and keep you from leaving. That's the job. But for what it's worth, running would be stupid. You're better off here than anywhere else right now." "That's what everyone keeps saying, like I should be grateful to be a prisoner." "You should be grateful to be alive. Your father pissed off Benedetti. You know what that man did to the last person who stole from him? Fed him to pigs, literally, while the guy was still breathing." Marco flicked ash over the wall. "Senor Varese might be a lot of things, but he's not that. He's never killed anyone that I know of, doesn't deal in blood, just money. Just money that happens to belong to people who feed others to pigs." "Welcome to the industry. We all make compromises." He ground out the cigarette. "You walking more, or are we done?" Evelyn walked, followed the path as it curved away from the cliff and into a small grove of fig trees, found a stone bench and sat down, breathing in the smell of sun-warmed earth and salt air. Marco took up position by a nearby tree, far enough to give her space, but close enough to intervene if she tried anything stupid. She sat there for over an hour, trying to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. But every potential escape route led to the same dead end. No money, no documents, no way to leave the country, even if she made it off the property. No one to help her except people who'd ask questions she couldn't answer. And behind it all, the looming threat of Benedetti and whatever he'd do if she somehow managed to slip free of Dominic's control. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when she finally stood and walked back to the house. Marco followed like a shadow. Inside, she found Senora Costa arranging flowers in the main hall. "Did you enjoy the gardens?" the housekeeper asked. "They're beautiful. Doesn't change anything." "No, I suppose it doesn't." Senora Costa adjusted a rose with care. "Senor Varese will be away on business for the next 3 days. He asked me to make sure you have everything you need." The relief that washed through Evelyn was immediate and shameful. 3 days without having to navigate Dominic's careful courtesy and calculated kindness. 3 days to figure out who she was in this new reality without someone watching her every reaction. "Where's he going?" "That's not my information to share, but he'll call each evening to check in. If there's anything you need to tell him, I can relay messages." "I need him to let me go. Anything else?" Senora Costa's tone remained perfectly neutral. Evelyn spent the next 3 days exploring the boundaries of her cage. She read everything she could find in the library about organized crime in Italy, trying to piece together the world Dominic operated in. She walked the gardens until she'd memorized every path, every stone, every place where the wall showed signs of age or weakness. She ate meals in her room and avoided conversation with the rotating cast of staff who brought her food and changed her linens and treated her with the careful politeness reserved for something fragile and potentially dangerous. On the evening of the third day, she was in the library when the phone on the desk rang. She stared at it for several rings before answering. "You're answering the phone now. That's progress." Dominic's voice sounded tired and slightly staticky, like he was calling from a distance. "I thought it might be Signora Costa." "She knows not to call the library line. That's mine." A pause. "How are you?" "Still a prisoner, still planning to escape, still furious. How's business?" "Complicated. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon." Another pause. "Have you been eating?" "Why do you care?" "Because I paid 32 million euros for you, and I'd prefer you didn't starve yourself out of spite." He sounded more amused than concerned. "Signora Costa said you've been walking the gardens. That's good. Fresh air helps." "Helps with what?" "With not going insane from being cooped up inside, with maintaining some sense of normalcy, with whatever you're processing." The background noise on his end shifted, a door closing, voices becoming muffled. "I know this isn't what you chose, Evelyn. I know it's terrible, but I'm trying to make it bearable." "You could make it bearable by letting me leave." "We've had this conversation. The answer hasn't changed." His tone hardened slightly. "Is there anything you actually need, or are we just going to argue in circles again?" "I need my own life back. I need to finish my degree and see my friend and not be owned by a criminal who thinks he can buy companionship like it's a fucking commodity." "Noted. Anything else?" The casual dismissal of everything she'd said made her want to scream. Instead, she said, "There's a first edition Morante on the third shelf that's falling apart. Someone should restore it before the binding gives out completely." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "I'll have it sent to a conservator." "What else?" "That's it. That's all I want from you." "Liar. But we'll get there." He hung up before she could respond. Evelyn slammed the phone down hard enough to make the base jump. Then she pulled the Morante from the shelf and held it carefully, looking at the cracked spine and yellowed pages. Someone had loved this book once, had read it enough times to wear it down to fragile. She wondered if that someone had been Dominic, or if he just collected things without caring about them. The next afternoon, a car pulled up to the entrance right on schedule. Evelyn watched from her window as Dominic emerged, exchanged words with Marco, and disappeared into the house. She stayed in her room, determined not to seek him out or show any interest in his return. He found her anyway, knocking on her door around 6. "Dinner's in 20 minutes. I'd appreciate it if you joined me. I'm not hungry. Come anyway." He didn't wait for a response, just walked away with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. Evelyn gave him 15 minutes, just to prove she could, then went downstairs. He was already at the table, reading something on his phone and drinking what looked like scotch instead of wine. He looked worse than when he'd left, shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that suggested stress or pain or both. "Business didn't go well?" she asked, sitting down across from him. Business went exactly as expected, which is its own kind of exhausting. He poured her wine without asking. "How was your week?" "Quiet. I read a lot. Walked until Marco probably wanted to shoot me just for the variety." "He mentioned you spent a lot of time by the cliff. Should I be worried you're planning something dramatic?" "Would it matter if you were?" "Yes, actually. Contrary to what you think, I don't want you to die. Rather defeats the purpose of the whole expensive rescue operation." He took a drink. "The Morante went to a conservator in Florence this morning. She said it'll take about 6 weeks, but it can be saved." The fact that he'd actually done it, had taken her offhand comment seriously enough to act on it immediately, threw her off balance. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "Depends on the question." "If I gave you money and documents and arranged transportation to anywhere you wanted to go, would you actually leave? Or would you end up dead or recaptured within a week?" Evelyn opened her mouth to say, of course she'd leave, she'd be gone in a heartbeat. He was delusional if he thought otherwise. But the lie stuck in her throat because they both knew the answer. I'd end up dead or recaptured within a week. That's what I thought, so we're stuck with each other, at least until the situation changes. You can spend that time hating me and being miserable, or you can try to find some way to exist here that doesn't make you want to throw yourself off a cliff. I'm hoping you'll choose the latter. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why does it matter to you whether I'm miserable or not? You got what you wanted. I'm here. I can't leave. Mission accomplished. Because I'm selfish enough to want you to eventually stop looking at me like I'm a monster, and self-aware enough to know that won't happen if you're actively suffering. He pushed his scotch away. And because despite everything, I actually like you. The person I saw in that file, the person who showed up to dinner and argued with me and asked about crime novels, I want to know that person, not the terrified, broken version that giving up would create. You can't have it both ways. Can't hold me prisoner and expect me to be the person I was when I was free. I know, but maybe you can become someone new, someone who's survived this and come out stronger. He stood. Think about it. In the meantime, eat. Sophia made your second favorite risotto, since we had the first one already. He left her alone in the dining room with a plate of food she didn't want and thought she couldn't organize. The risotto sat there getting cold while she tried to figure out what game he was playing. Because this, the careful cultivation of her comfort, the attention to her preferences, the genuine seeming interest in her as a person, it was all strategy. Had to be. You didn't spend 32 million euros on someone and then hope they'd just naturally grow to like you. Except he'd also sent the book to be restored, had given her privacy and space and the closest thing to freedom available in her circumstances, had never touched her except to drape a blanket over her shoulders when she was cold. The cognitive dissonance was making her head hurt. She ate the risotto. It was predictably perfect. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Dominic was gone during the days, returning for dinner most evenings. They'd eat and talk, carefully neutral conversations about books and philosophy, and nothing that mattered. Sometimes he'd join her in the library afterward, both of them reading in companionable silence that should have felt wrong but somehow didn't. He never pushed for more, never demanded her company or affection or gratitude. Just showed up, was present, and let her maintain whatever distance she needed. It was insidious how quickly it started to feel normal, how she found herself looking forward to their dinner conversations, to the way he'd argue a point with genuine interest in her perspective, how the house started to feel less like a prison and more like just a place she happened to live, how Marco became less a guard and more a familiar presence on her walks. She hated herself for adapting, for proving Dominic right about human beings and their capacity to adjust to anything given enough time. On the 16th day, everything changed. She was in the gardens when she heard shouting from the house. Marco immediately moved between her and the noise, one hand going to the gun under his jacket. More shouting, in Italian, male voices raised in what sounded like an argument, then a single gunshot, sharp and final. Inside! Now! Marco grabbed her arm and started pulling her toward the house. What's happening? Just move. They were halfway across the garden when 3 men emerged from the house. Not Dominic's security team. These were strangers, wearing suits too nice for violence except that 2 of them had guns drawn. The third one, older and heavy-set with silver hair, pointed directly at Evelyn. That's her. Benedetti wants her brought in alive. Marco shoved Evelyn behind him and drew his weapon. Not happening. Turn around and leave while you still can. You're outnumbered, and your boss is bleeding out in his office. Walk away and we'll let you live. The words punched through Evelyn's chest. Bleeding out. Dominic was hurt, was possibly dying while these men argued over who got to kidnap her. Something shifted in her chest. Not affection, she told herself, just basic human concern for someone she'd been living with for 2 weeks. Just the recognition that Dominic, for all his faults, had kept her safe, and these men definitely wouldn't. Go, she told Marco quietly. Go help him. I'll run. He'll kill me if anything happens to you. He'll be dead if you don't help him. She could see it in Marco's face, the terrible calculation of which order to prioritize. Go, please. He went, sprinting back toward the house with his gun up. The 3 men started forward, and Evelyn ran in the opposite direction, toward the cliff path, toward the section of wall she'd identified as most degraded, toward the desperate, stupid plan she'd been trying not to think about for 2 weeks. She heard them behind her, footsteps pounding on gravel. One of them yelled for her to stop. She didn't. Just ran harder, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, until she reached the wall and didn't even hesitate. She swung herself over, finding the narrow ledge she'd noticed on her walks. Barely 6 inches wide, crumbling rock and scrubby plants, completely invisible from above. She pressed herself flat against the cliff face and held her breath. The footsteps got closer, stopped right above her. Where the fuck did she go? She couldn't have just disappeared. Check the path. Benedetti's going to have our heads if we don't bring her in. They argued for another minute, then moved away. Evelyn stayed frozen on the ledge, not daring to move. The wind pulled at her clothes. Pebbles dislodged by her feet tumbled down the cliff face, and she couldn't hear them hit bottom. Her fingers were cramping from gripping the rock. If she fell, she'd die. If she climbed back up, she'd be captured. If she stayed here, she'd eventually fall anyway. She stayed. Time became elastic. Could have been 10 minutes or an hour before she heard new voices above, Dominic's security team sweeping the gardens. She recognized Marco's accent. Boss wants her found, now. She couldn't have gotten far. I'm here, Evelyn called up, her voice hoarse. I'm on the ledge. A face appeared over the wall. Marco, looking relieved and furious in equal measure. Christo, don't move. I'll get a rope. They pulled her up 5 minutes later, and Evelyn collapsed on solid ground with shaking legs and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Marco hauled her to her feet less than gently. You almost died doing that. Is Dominic alive? For now. Took a bullet to the shoulder. He's stable, but he wants to see you. Can you walk? She could. Barely. They headed back toward the house, where the chaos was starting to resolve into order. Dominic's men securing the perimeter, someone shouting orders in rapid Italian, the smell of gunpowder still sharp in the air. One body lay covered with a sheet near the entrance. The other 2 had apparently been captured, zip-tied, and kneeling under guard. Dominic was in his office, slumped in a chair while someone who looked like a doctor worked on his shoulder. Blood had soaked through his shirt, spreading dark across the expensive fabric. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were alert, tracking her movement as she appeared in the doorway. You're alive, he said, and something in his voice suggested he'd actually been worried. So are you. Apparently we're both hard to kill. Apparently. He winced as the doctor did something that involved a lot of blood and a needle. Marco said you hid on the cliff ledge. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. They said Benedetti sent them. Said he wants me brought in alive. He knows you're here. Someone talked, or someone figured it out, and now he's making a move. Dominic's jaw tightened. This was a test. Next time they'll bring more men and better planning. We need to move you somewhere safer. Where's safer than a fortress with armed guards? Nowhere, which is the problem. He closed his eyes briefly. I should have anticipated this. Should have known Benedetti wouldn't let a 32 million euro thumb in his eye go unanswered. The doctor finished whatever he was doing and stepped back. You need rest and antibiotics and probably a few days of not getting shot. Can you manage that? Probably not, but I'll try. Dominic waved him away and looked at Evelyn. You could have run. Could have let them take you. Could have tried to make a deal with Benedetti. Why didn't you? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to examine. Because you're a known quantity, and he's not. Because I'd rather be here than wherever he'd take me. Because... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because? He was watching her carefully now. Because you got shot protecting me. And that means something, even if I don't want it to. The admission felt like losing ground. Don't read too much into it. I still hate being here. Noted. He tried to stand and immediately went pale. The doctor caught him before he fell. Bed. Now. Before you pass out and I have to carry you. Evelyn found herself helping, getting under Dominic's good arm while the doctor took the other side. They maneuvered him out of the office and toward what she assumed was his bedroom, a suite in the west wing she'd never seen, larger than hers, with the same dramatic ocean views. They got him onto this bed and the doctor started hooking up an IV. Out, Dominic told her. You don't need to see this. I've seen worse. She hadn't really, but she was tired of being treated like something fragile. What happens now? Now I heal and we figure out how to handle Benedetti before he tries again, which he will. He doesn't forgive debts or, insults. His eyes were starting to glaze slightly from whatever the doctor had given him. Stay in the house. Don't go to the gardens. Don't go anywhere without 3 guards minimum. And Evelyn? What? Thank you for not running. I know you could have. His words were starting to slur. Means something to me, too. He passed out before she could respond. The doctor checked his vitals and nodded. He'll sleep for several hours, best thing for him. You should get some rest, too. You look like you've had a hell of a day. Evelyn went back to her room, but didn't rest. Just sat on her bed trying to process what had happened. Men had invaded the house trying to kidnap her. Dominic had been shot defending her. She'd risked death on a cliff ledge rather than let herself be taken. And somewhere in all of that, the lines between captor and protector had blurred into something she couldn't quite define. She'd thanked him for not letting her fall. He'd thanked her for not running. And the terrible, confusing truth was that she'd actually meant it. The house transformed overnight into something resembling a military installation. By dawn, the security team had tripled in size. Hard-faced men in tactical gear patrolling the perimeter in shifts, checking IDs, installing additional cameras and motion sensors. Evelyn watched from her window as they worked, turning her beautiful prison into a fortified one. She didn't see Dominic for 2 days. Signora Costa reported that he was recovering well, managing the crisis from his bedroom via phone and laptop, but that the doctor had threatened to sedate him if he tried to get up too soon. On the 3rd morning, Evelyn woke to find a note slipped under her door. If you're awake and not actively trying to escape, come to my room. We need to talk. D. She should have ignored it, should have stayed in her suite and maintained whatever boundaries still existed between them. Instead, she found herself walking through the now familiar hallways to the west wing, past 2 guards who nodded her through without comment. Dominic's door was ajar. She knocked anyway. Come in. He was propped up in bed with a laptop balanced on his knees, his shoulder heavily bandaged, wearing a t-shirt that showed more of his body than she'd ever seen. Without the armor of expensive suits, he looked different, still commanding, but more human, vulnerable even, though she suspected he'd hate that word. You look terrible, she said. I got shot. It's not a great look. He closed the laptop and set it aside. Sit, please. There was a chair by the window. She took it, maintaining distance. Signora Costa said you've been working. Shouldn't you be resting? I'll rest when Benedetti's handled. Speaking of which, he reached for a folder on the nightstand and winced at the movement. I've had my people looking into your father's situation. Found something interesting. Evelyn's chest tightened. Is he alive? As of 3 days ago, yes. He's in Croatia, hiding under a false name in some coastal town, living quietly, keeping his head down. Apparently he's been there since before the auction. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Her father was alive. Not dead in a ditch somewhere, not dissolved in acid, not fed to pigs. Just alive and hiding, and apparently content to let his daughter be sold to pay his debts. The relief curdled into something uglier. He knows I was taken, she said flatly. He knew they'd grabbed me and he just left. Benedetti's people contacted him after the auction, told him you'd been sold, that the debt was considered partially satisfied, that he still owed $8 million, but they'd give him time to come up with it if he surfaced. He refused. Dominic's expression was carefully neutral. He said, and I'm quoting here, that you were resourceful enough to land on your feet and he wasn't dying for Benedetti's entertainment. The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn had spent weeks assuming her father was dead, that he'd been a victim in all this, that he'd have saved her if he could. But no, he was alive and well, and had chosen his own survival over hers without apparent hesitation. Oh, her voice came out small. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. What I wanted was for my father to not be a money launderer who abandoned his daughter to pay his debts. But we don't always get what we want, do we? She stood, suddenly needing to move. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth about the people who shaped your situation. And because it changes things. Changes what? Your willingness to stay here. Your understanding of where you're actually safe. He shifted against the pillows, grimacing. Benedetti's still looking for your father. If he finds him, he'll torture him for information about assets, accounts, anything that can be liquidated. Your father will eventually give up the location of every safe house and hiding spot he has, and one of those spots is a property in your name. An apartment in Como that he bought years ago, put in your name for tax purposes. Evelyn's stomach dropped. I didn't know about that. You weren't supposed to, but it's there, legal documentation and everything, which means if Benedetti finds your father, he finds that property. And if he finds that property, he'll assume you might run there. He'll have it watched, and if you ever tried to leave here and go somewhere you thought was safe, you'd walk right into his hands. So I'm trapped here forever. That's what you're saying. I'm saying that running right now would be suicide, and I'd prefer you didn't die. He paused. But I'm also saying that I can handle this. Can negotiate with Benedetti, can arrange something that keeps you safe without requiring you to stay locked in this house for the rest of your life. It'll take time and money and careful maneuvering, but it's possible. In exchange for what? In exchange for you giving me a chance. A real one. Not the passive resistance version where you go through the motions while hating every minute. His dark eyes were steady on hers. I want 6 months. 6 months where you actually try to see if this, whatever this is between us, could become something worth choosing. If at the end of that time you still want to leave, I'll arrange it. New identity, new city, enough money to start over safely. But you have to actually try. You're bargaining for my cooperation with my own freedom. I'm bargaining for time to prove I'm not the villain you want me to be. There's a difference. He leaned back, looking exhausted. Think about it. You don't have to answer now. Evelyn left without responding, her mind churning. 6 months. Half a year of actually engaging with Dominic instead of just enduring him. Half a year of pretending this situation was something other than captivity, dressed up in silk sheets and Mediterranean views. And at the end of it, if she played along well enough, she'd get what? Freedom with a new name in a new city, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if Benedetti's people would find her anyway. Or she could refuse, could maintain her resistance and her anger and her sense of self, could stay exactly as trapped as she was now, but at least keep her dignity intact. She spent the rest of the day in the library, pulling books at random and not reading any of them. When Signora Costa came to tell her dinner was ready, she said she wasn't hungry. When Marco checked on her around 9, she told him she was fine and to please leave her alone. When midnight came and went, and she was still sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, she finally admitted to herself that she didn't know what to do. The knock on the library door made her jump. "It's me," Dominic's voice came through the wood. "Can I come in?" "You're supposed to be resting." "I'll rest when I'm dead. Can I come in or not?" She didn't answer, which he apparently took as permission. The door opened and he appeared, moving carefully, one hand braced against his injured shoulder. He'd put on actual clothes, dark pants and a button-down shirt hanging open over his t-shirt, like he'd dressed in a hurry. "You shouldn't be walking around," Evelyn said. "Probably not, but you've been in here for 8 hours and Signora Costa is worried you're planning something dramatic." He lowered himself into the chair across from her with obvious discomfort. "Talk to me." "About what? About how my father chose himself over me? About how I'm trapped between a man who bought me and a man who'd kill me? About how every choice I have is terrible and I'm supposed to be grateful for the least terrible option? About how you're feeling, about what you actually want, not what you think you should want." He was quiet for a moment. "I know I'm asking a lot. Asking you to trust someone who started this by purchasing you like property. But I'm also the only person in your current reality who's invested in your survival for reasons beyond money or revenge. You paid 32 million euros. That's pretty money-focused. I paid 32 million euros because I could afford it, and because I wanted you here. The money's already gone. Sunk cost. What I'm investing now is time and effort and apparently getting shot trying to keep you safe. That's not about recouping losses. That's about actually caring whether you live or die." Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest. "Why me? Really? Not the bullshit about narrative structure or seeing potential. Why did you actually want me here badly enough to bid against people who probably wanted me for much simpler reasons?" Dominic was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less controlled, more raw. Because I saw your photograph and you looked like someone who was still surprised by life, still open to it. And I've spent 25 years in a world where everyone's angle calculating and threat assessing and performing whatever version of themselves serves their interests. I wanted, he stopped, searching for words. I wanted to know if it was possible to be near someone who hadn't been completely ruined by this life. Someone who might make me remember what it felt like before I became whatever I am now. That's not fair to put on me. I can't fix you or redeem you or make you feel human again. That's not my job. I know, you're right. It's selfish and unfair, and I shouldn't have said it. He stood carefully. But it's the truth. Take it or leave it. He was halfway to the door when Evelyn heard herself say, "I'll try." He turned back. "What?" 6 months. I'll try. Not because I think it'll work or because I forgive any of this, but because you're right that running would get me killed, and because I don't actually have better options, and because she stopped, not sure how to finish. Because? Because you got shot protecting me, and that means I owe you something, even if I hate that I do. And because maybe there's a version of this where I survive with my sanity intact, and that requires me to stop fighting every single minute of every single day. She looked at him directly. But I need things from you too. Name them. Honesty. Real honesty, not careful corporate manipulation. If I ask you something, you tell me the truth, even if you think it'll make me hate you more. She held up a second finger. Privacy. My room, my space, no cameras, no monitoring, no guards following me inside the house. I need somewhere that's actually mine. Done. What else? Respect. You don't touch me without permission. You don't make demands about my time or my attention or my body. If this thing you want develops, it develops because I choose it, not because you engineer it. A third finger. And information. You tell me what's happening with Benedetti, with my father, with anything that affects my safety. I'm not a child or a pet. I'm a person who deserves to know what threats I'm facing. Dominic nodded slowly. All of that is reasonable. I agree to all of it. Just like that? Just like that. Though I'd like to add one condition of my own, if you're willing to hear it. What condition? That you actually talk to me, not just tactical conversations about what you need or what's happening. Real conversations. About books, about ideas, about anything that matters to you. I want to know the person you are, not just manage the situation you're in. It was such a small thing to ask for. Conversation, connection, the basic currency of human interaction. And yet it felt like the most dangerous concession of all, because talking to him meant letting him in, meant risking that he'd been right about proximity and time and the formation of bonds, whether they wanted them or not. Okay, she said finally, I can do that. Then we have an agreement. He moved back toward the chair, slower this time, and Evelyn could see the pain he was in. Can I stay for a while? The walk back to my room sounds exhausting, and you haven't had anyone to argue with about books in weeks. You should be in bed. I should be a lot of things I'm not. Come on, tell me what you've been reading. I saw you pulled the eco earlier. So she told him, and he argued with her interpretation of the ending. And they spent an hour dissecting narrative theory and postmodern literature while he gradually turned paler and his breathing became more labored. When he finally admitted he needed to get back to his room, Evelyn helped him up and walked with him, supporting his weight on his good side. Thank you, he said at his door. For trying. I know it's not easy. Nothing about this is easy, but I'm tired of being angry all the time. It's exhausting. Then rest. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He disappeared into his room, and Evelyn walked back to her own suite, feeling like she'd just made either the smartest or stupidest decision of her life. Possibly both. The next few weeks developed a rhythm that felt almost normal if she didn't think too hard about how she'd arrived at it. Dominic recovered slowly, spending his days managing his business from home and his evenings with her. Dinners that stretched into hours, conversations that ranged from philosophy to politics to the particular way certain authors constructed sentences. He kept his word about privacy and respect, never pushing, never demanding, just present and interesting and occasionally funny in a dry way that caught her off guard. The security situation stabilized. No more attacks, though Marco reported increased surveillance from cars that were definitely Benedetti's people watching the access road. Dominic's team watched them watching, and everyone maintained the careful detente of criminals who knew that open warfare would be expensive for everyone involved. "He's trying to figure out his next move," Dominic explained one evening over dinner, "testing our defenses, seeing if we'll make a mistake. But he's also negotiating with me through back channels. Apparently the $8 million your father still owes is negotiable if I'm willing to make certain arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind where I use my networks to move some of his money through channels that are harder to trace than his usual routes. I'd be doing him a favor worth more than $8 million in reduced risk, and in exchange he'd consider your father's debt satisfied and stop trying to kidnap you." He cut his steak with precision. "I'm considering it. Would that be dangerous for you?" "Everything I do is dangerous. This would just be a different flavor of it." He looked at her directly. "Would it bother you if I did business with the man who tried to have you killed?" Evelyn thought about it. A month ago, she'd have said yes, absolutely. It would be a betrayal and proof that he valued money over her safety. Now, understanding the world he operated in, where alliances shifted based on utility and enemies became partners based on mutual interest, she recognized it for what it was: pragmatism. Survival. "It would bother me if you did it, and it put you at risk," she said finally. "But if it makes me safer and solves the problem, then no. Do what you need to do." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or satisfaction that she'd given an answer that acknowledged the complexity of his world. "I'll think about it. The offer's on the table for another week." That night, after dinner, they ended up in the library again. It had become their default space, neutral territory where they could exist side by side without the weight of bedrooms or formal dining rooms. Dominic stretched out in his usual chair with a book on Renaissance history. Evelyn curled up with poetry, occasionally reading passages aloud when something struck her. "Listen to this," she said, translating a Montal poem from Italian. "We knew too much of life, and nothing of one another. Doesn't that feel like it could describe most relationships?" "Most relationships in my world, certainly. Everyone performs a version of themselves calibrated to their audience. Authenticity is vulnerability, and vulnerability gets you killed." He marked his page. "Is that what we're doing? Knowing nothing of each other despite proximity?" "I don't know what we're doing." She closed the book. "Some days I think I'm starting to understand you. Other days you're completely opaque." "Same. Though I think you're more transparent than you realize. You have terrible tells when you're lying or uncomfortable." "I do not." "You absolutely do. Your left hand fidgets with whatever's nearby. Your sleeve, a glass, the corner of a book. And you won't make eye contact, which is unusual because you're generally very direct." He was smiling slightly. "It's charming, actually. Like you haven't learned to hide yourself yet." "Maybe I don't want to learn. Maybe staying obvious is how I avoid becoming like everyone else in your world." "Maybe. But it also makes you vulnerable to people who'd exploit it." His smile faded. "Which is why you need to stay here, where the only person reading your tells is someone who won't use them against you." The casual possessiveness of the statement should have bothered her. Instead, she found it almost comforting, the acknowledgement that he was watching her, learning her, and choosing not to weaponize what he learned. That was trust, she realized. Not the kind built on years of friendship, but the kind forged in crisis and maintained through consistent action. "I talked to my father," she said abruptly. Dominic sat up straighter. "When?" "Yesterday. You said I could use the secure line in your office for personal calls. I tracked down the number for the place in Croatia through some old contacts. He answered on the third try." She picked at the corner of her book. "He asked how I was, like I'd been on vacation, like I hadn't been kidnapped and sold because of his debts." "What did you say?" "I asked him why he left me, why he didn't try to pay the debt or negotiate or literally anything except abandon his daughter to criminals." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "He said he knew I'd be fine, that I was smart and adaptable and would land on my feet, that he couldn't help me if he was dead, so the logical choice was to save himself and trust I'd survive." That's one way to justify cowardice. He's not wrong, though. I did survive. I am adapting. He made a bet on my resilience, and it paid off. She looked at Dominic. "I should hate him more than I do, but mostly I just feel empty. Like the person I thought he was never existed. Like I've been mourning a father who was always a fiction." I'm sorry, that's a terrible thing to discover. Is it better or worse than discovering your captor might actually care whether you live or die? I'd argue those aren't comparable situations, but I see your point. He stood and crossed to the bookshelf, pulling down a bottle of whiskey she hadn't noticed hidden behind the books. Want some? You look like you could use it. I thought you weren't supposed to drink with the painkillers. I stopped taking them 3 days ago. Turns out I prefer mild discomfort to feeling disconnected from my own thoughts. He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. To surviving terrible fathers and impossible situations. They drank. The whiskey burned in a way that felt clarifying. Tell me something true, Evelyn said. Something you wouldn't normally say. Something that makes you vulnerable. Dominic settled back in his chair, considering. I'm lonely. Have been for years. Built this empire, accumulated this wealth, and somewhere along the way forgot how to connect with people in any way that wasn't transactional. And I'm terrified that even if you stay, even if this works, I won't remember how to be the kind of person someone could actually love. The honesty of it stole her breath. That's a lot. You asked for truth. That's what I have. He took another drink. Your turn. Something true. I don't hate you anymore. I'm not sure when it stopped, but somewhere in the last few weeks I went from wanting to escape to just wanting to survive to actually looking forward to our conversations. And that scares me because it feels like becoming complicit in my own captivity. Or it feels like adapting to your circumstances in a way that doesn't destroy you. There's no virtue in suffering needlessly, Evelyn. If being here becomes bearable, if I become bearable, that's not weakness, that's survival. Is it? Or is it Stockholm Syndrome dressed up in philosophy? Does it matter? If the end result is that you're safe and fed and occasionally happy, does it matter what we call it? She didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, drinking whiskey and watching the fire someone had built earlier burn down to embers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying the smell of rain. Storm coming, Dominic said. Big one, according to the weather reports. Should hit around midnight. I like storms. They make everything feel clean afterward. We'll see. Mediterranean storms can be violent. Last big one we had, we lost 3 trees and part of the garden wall. He glanced at her. You're not nervous about weather? Why would I be? I'm in a fortress with multiple backup generators and enough security to repel a small army. If I can't be safe here during a storm, I can't be safe anywhere. That's a fair point. He finished his whiskey and stood. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Conference calls with people in 4 time zones about the Benedetti situation. You're really going to do it, the arrangement he proposed? I think so. It solves multiple problems and the risk is manageable if I structure it correctly. And more importantly, it gets him to stop trying to kill you, which is becoming a personal priority. He paused at the door. Thank you for tonight. For the honesty, it helps to know I'm not completely delusional about what's happening here. What is happening here? I think we're becoming friends, or something approximating it, and maybe that's enough to build on, when we have time. He left before she could respond. Evelyn stayed in the library until the storm hit, watching through the windows as lightning split the sky and rain hammered against the glass with force that sounded like violence. The house shuddered with wind. Somewhere in the distance she heard something crash. Probably those trees Dominic had mentioned, or part of the wall giving way. She should have been frightened. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Safe in the eye of chaos, watching destruction from behind barriers that held. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Around 2 a.m, the power went out. Emergency lights kicked in immediately, bathing everything in dim blue. Evelyn made her way back to her room, climbed into bed, and fell asleep to the sound of wind trying and failing to tear the house apart. She woke to silence and sunlight streaming through the French doors. The storm had passed, leaving the air crystalline and the sea calm. She walked out onto the balcony and looked down at the gardens, where security teams were already clearing debris, broken branches, scattered roof tiles, sections of the wall that had indeed crumbled. But the house stood, untouched and unmoved, like it had weathered 100 such storms and would weather 100 more. Something in her chest loosened. Not acceptance exactly, not surrender, but a recognition that she'd survived another night in this strange life, and survival was starting to feel like something other than just endurance. Maybe Dominic had been right. Maybe people really could adapt to anything given enough time. Maybe 6 months would be enough to figure out who she was in this new reality. Not the girl who'd been kidnapped, not the captive slowly breaking, but someone else entirely. Someone stronger and stranger, and capable of choosing to stay in a fortress with a lonely criminal who read poetry and got shot defending her. She showered and dressed, then went to find Dominic. He was in his office, on the phone, but gestured for her to come in. She sat in the chair across from his desk and waited while he finished a conversation in rapid Italian about moving money through Cyprus. "Storm damage?" she asked when he hung up. "Nothing critical, some cosmetic repairs, some landscaping. Could have been worse." He leaned back in his chair. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I expected. You?" "Not really. Spent most of the night thinking about whether I'm making the right call with Benedetti." He rubbed his eyes. "I'm going to do it. Going to take his deal, move his money, clear your father's debt. Should be finalized within the week." "And then what?" "And then you're officially safe from that particular threat. We can focus on other things." "Like what?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Like figuring out what happens after your 6 months are up. Like whether you'll actually want to leave or if you'll have found reasons to stay. Like whether I can become someone worth staying for." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the controlled, careful Dominic who'd bought her at an auction. This was someone genuinely uncertain about the outcome, genuinely invested in her answer, genuinely hoping she'd choose him when choice became real. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me again in 5 months." "I will." He smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. "In the meantime, want to help me figure out how to launder 8 million euros through a legitimate business front without triggering any regulatory flags? It's actually fascinating if you like complex puzzles." "Are you seriously asking me to help you commit financial crimes?" "I'm asking if you want to understand what I actually do all day instead of just theoretically accepting it." "Thought it might be interesting. Educational, even." It was absurd. It was probably illegal. It was definitely not something a literature student from Milan should be doing with her Thursday morning. "Show me," Evelyn said. And he did. 3 months into their agreement, Evelyn woke up nauseous for the 5th morning in a row. She made it to the bathroom just in time, retching until her stomach was empty and her throat burned. When she was done, she sat on the cool tile floor with her back against the wall, trying to remember when her last period had been. 2 months ago? 3? She'd always been irregular when stressed, and the last few months had been nothing but stress wrapped in Mediterranean views and philosophical conversations. But this felt different. She cleaned herself up, brushed her teeth twice, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked the same, maybe a little fuller than it had been, maybe a slight hollowness under her eyes from the morning sickness. But otherwise, the same woman who'd been adapting to captivity, learning money laundering techniques, eating dinner with a crime lord, and finding herself actually enjoying it. The same woman who'd let Dominic kiss her 2 weeks ago in the library after a conversation about Dante that had somehow turned into a conversation about desire and choice, and whether wanting something made it less wrong. Who'd kissed him back and then retreated to her room in a panic, spending 3 days avoiding him before finally admitting that she wanted it to happen again. The same woman who'd spent last Tuesday night in his bed, making a choice she'd never thought she'd make, with a man she'd sworn she'd never stop hating. The same woman who was now, apparently, pregnant. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub and tried to breathe through the panic. This changed everything, complicated everything beyond any hope of simple resolution. She couldn't raise a child here, in this fortress with armed guards and criminal connections. Couldn't bring a baby into Dominic's world of offshore accounts and dangerous alliances. She needed to know for sure before she spiraled further. An hour later, she was in Dominic's office, where he was reviewing contracts for a shipping company that was definitely a front for moving something illegal. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately shifted from professional to concerned. "You look terrible. Are you sick?" "Maybe. I need to see a doctor. Not the one who treated your gunshot wound. A different doctor. Someone from outside who doesn't work for you." "Why?" His eyes narrowed. "What's wrong?" "I just need to see a doctor. Can you arrange that or not?" He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him running calculations, trying to figure out what she wasn't saying. I can have someone here this afternoon. Discreet, professional, no connection to my usual people. Will that work? Yes, thank you. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Evelyn, whatever this is, you can tell me. You know that, right? I know, I'm just not ready to yet. The doctor arrived at 3, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who introduced herself as Dr. Russo and asked no questions about why Evelyn was living in a fortress on a cliff. She did a thorough examination, drew blood, asked questions about symptoms and timing, and then confirmed what Evelyn had already known with terrible certainty. You're about 10 weeks pregnant, healthy, from what I can tell, though we'll want to do an ultrasound to be sure. Do you have questions? Evelyn had 1,000 questions. She asked none of them, just thanked the doctor, accepted the prenatal vitamins, and waited until she heard the car pulling away before allowing herself to fall apart. She made it to her room before the tears came, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd been careful, or at least she thought she had, but apparently not careful enough. And now there was a life growing inside her, a tiny collection of cells that would become a person, and that person would be born into this impossible situation with a father who was a criminal and a mother who'd been purchased at an auction. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later. Dominic's voice quiet and careful. Can I come in? No? Dr. Russo told me. Said I should know given the circumstances. Can I please come in? Evelyn unlocked the door but didn't open it, just retreated to her bed and pulled a pillow over her face. She heard him enter, heard the door close, heard his footsteps cross the room. Felt the mattress dip as he sat on the edge of the bed. Talk to me, he said. I can't do this. I can't bring a baby into this life. Into your world. I can't. Okay. Okay, breathe. Just breathe. His hand found hers, and she let him hold it because she needed something to anchor her. We'll figure this out. Whatever you want to do, we'll figure it out. What I want is to go back 3 months and not let this happen. I know, but we can't do that, so we need to deal with what is. He was quiet for a moment. Do you want to keep it? The question hung in the air, huge and terrible and necessary. Evelyn pulled the pillow off her face and looked at him. His expression was carefully neutral, giving her space to decide without influencing her answer. I don't know. I don't know what I want except for everything to be different than it is. That's fair. You don't have to decide right now. You have time. He squeezed her hand. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. If you decide to keep this baby, I will do everything in my power to keep both of you safe. I will restructure my entire life, my entire business, whatever it takes to make sure that child grows up protected and loved. And if you decide not to keep it, I will support that decision and make sure you have access to whatever care you need. Either way, you're not alone in this. You can't promise that. You can't promise safety in your world. People tried to kidnap me 3 months ago. They shot you defending me. What happens when they come back? What happens when our child becomes leverage someone can use against you? Then I removed the leverage by removing myself from the situations that create it. He shifted to face her fully. I've been thinking about getting out for years, transitioning to legitimate business, cutting ties with people like Benedetti, building something clean. I never had a reason strong enough to actually do it. Now I do. A baby isn't a reason to upend your entire life. A baby is exactly the reason to upend your entire life, especially when that baby is mine. His voice was steady, certain. I'm 45 years old. I've spent 2.5 decades building an empire I don't particularly like, in a world I don't particularly want to be part of. And in the last 4 months, you've made me remember what it feels like to want something beyond money and power and survival. If you're pregnant with my child, that's not a disaster. That's a second chance I don't deserve, but will take anyway. Evelyn closed her eyes. I'm scared. I know, me too. But we'll figure it out together. He lay down beside her, careful not to crowd her, just present. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'm here. They lay in silence while the afternoon light slanted through the windows and the sea murmured against the cliffs far below. Evelyn felt his hand warm in hers, felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, felt something in her chest unlock that she'd been holding tight for months. "I think I want to keep it," she whispered. "I think I'm terrified and unprepared and completely overwhelmed, but I think I want to keep it." "Okay, then we keep it. We'll make it work." "How? How do we make this work when everything about our situation is impossible?" "One day at a time, one decision at a time, starting with getting you proper medical care and making sure you're healthy and safe." He rolled onto his side to look at her. "And starting with me having a very serious conversation with Benedetti about the terms of our arrangement going forward." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where I make it clear that if anyone threatens you or our child, I will burn his entire operation to the ground and salt the earth behind me." He understands that kind of language. "That's not reassuring." "It's the best I can offer right now. But I mean it, Evelyn. I will protect you both. Even if it costs me everything I've built. Even if it costs me my life." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She actually believed him. This man who'd bought her at an auction, who'd held her captive in a fortress, who'd slowly and methodically broken down her resistance through patience and proximity and occasional genuine kindness. He would die for her, would die for their child. And somewhere in the last 4 months, she'd started to care whether he lived or died too. "I don't love you yet," she said, because he needed to know. "I don't know if I ever will. But I don't hate you anymore, and I want this baby to have a father who's present and trying. Can that be enough?" "It's more than enough. It's more than I hoped for." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "We'll make it work. I promise." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Dominic hired a full medical team, obstetrician, nurse, nutritionist, who set up a proper clinic in one of the unused wings of the house. He brought in contractors to start converting spaces into nursery options for Evelyn to choose from. He spent hours on encrypted calls, restructuring his business interests, selling off the riskier ventures, transitioning everything toward legitimate enterprises that wouldn't put his family in danger. His family. He'd started calling them that. Not just Evelyn, not just the baby, but the three of them together. A unit. A family. Evelyn watched him transform with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The ruthless efficiency that had made him successful in crime was now focused on building something clean. He established a foundation focused on helping victims of human trafficking. A pointed middle finger to the world that had facilitated her own auction. He bought a winery in Tuscany that was actually a winery, not a front, and started plans to develop it into a sustainable business. He met with lawyers about legitimizing his finances, paying years of back taxes, creating a legal framework that would survive scrutiny. "You're really doing this," she said one evening, watching him review documents about the foundation's charter. "Actually getting out. I told you I would. I don't make promises I can't keep." He signed something and set it aside. "Besides, our child deserves better than a father who operates in the shadows, deserves to grow up knowing I chose them over everything else." "They're not even born yet. You don't have to do all this right now?" "I do, though, because if I don't do it now, something will come up. Some deal will be too good to pass up, some threat will need managing, and I'll slip back into old patterns. Better to burn the bridges while I'm motivated." He looked at her. "How are you feeling? You looked nauseous this morning." "I'm fine. The morning sickness is getting better." She settled into the chair across from his desk. "I had the ultrasound today. Want to see?" She pulled out the grainy black and white image Dr. Russo had given her. Dominic took it like it was made of glass, staring at the tiny bean-shaped form that was barely recognizable as human. "That's really them? That's our baby?" "That's them. About the size of a lime right now, apparently, with a heartbeat that sounds like a galloping horse." She'd cried when she heard it, that impossibly fast flutter of life. Dr. Russo said everything looks good, healthy development, no concerns. "When will we know if it's a boy or girl?" "Another month or so. Do you have a preference?" "Healthy. That's my only preference." He propped the ultrasound image on his desk where he could see it. "Though a girl would be poetic justice, I suppose, given how we met." A girl who grows up knowing her father's first act of parenting was buying her mother at an auction? That's some heavy therapy in her future. "We'll pay for excellent therapy, and we'll tell her the truth, that I made terrible choices that led to the best thing that ever happened to me." He reached across the desk for her hand. Thank you. For what? For choosing to keep this baby. For giving me a chance to be better than I was. For not running when you had every reason to. His grip was warm and steady. I know this isn't the life you would have chosen. I know I forced circumstances that eliminated your other options. But I'm grateful every day that you're here. I'm not grateful yet, Evelyn said honestly. I'm still processing, still figuring out who I am in all of this. But I'm trying, and that's something. It's everything. 2 months later, Evelyn woke up at 4 a.m. to find Dominic's side of the bed empty. They'd been sharing a room for weeks now, her choice, made gradually, one night at a time, until it seemed ridiculous to maintain separate suites when they fell asleep talking and woke up tangled together. She found him on the balcony, staring out at the pre-dawn sea. Can't sleep? She asked, wrapping a blanket around herself against the cool air. Just thinking. The Benedetti deal finalizes today. After this, we're completely clear. No more connections to that world, no more obligations, no more threats. He pulled her against his side. Thought I'd watch the sunrise. Felt symbolic. You're such a romantic. Who knew? Apparently desperation and impending fatherhood bring it out. He rested his chin on top of her head. Are you scared? About the baby? About all of this? Terrified, but also excited. Also weirdly calm, like maybe we can actually pull this off. She felt the baby kick, a flutter that was becoming more frequent and pronounced. They're active this morning. Can I feel? She guided his hand to where the movement was strongest. They stood there in the dark, waiting, until the baby kicked again directly against his palm. Dominic's breath caught. That's incredible. That's really them in there. That's really them. Getting bigger every day, running out of room, preparing to make our lives infinitely more complicated. She leaned back against him. Are you sure you want this? Really sure? Because once they're born, there's no going back. You can't change your mind about being a father. I've never been more sure of anything. I know I forced this situation. I know our beginning was terrible and wrong and something I'll spend the rest of my life making up to you. But this? He spread his hand across her stomach. This is the first choice I've made in 25 years that feels completely right. The sunrise came slowly, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. They watched it together, and Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Not quite forgiveness. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully forgive how this started. But acceptance, maybe. Recognition that they'd built something real from impossible circumstances, and that real was enough to build a life on. I think I love you, she said quietly. I'm not sure when it happened, but I look at you, and I don't see the man who bought me anymore. I see the father of my child. I see someone who's trying to be better, and I think that might be love, or at least the beginning of it. Dominic was very still. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I know I love you, have for months. Was just waiting for you to catch up. Arrogant. Honest. He turned her to face him. I love you. I love our child. I love the life we're building, and I'm going to spend every day proving I deserve to be part of it. He kissed her as the sun cleared the horizon, and Evelyn kissed him back with a certainty she'd never expected to feel. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd have chosen, but the one she'd survived into and was learning to embrace. 3 months later, on a bright October morning with the Mediterranean sparkling beyond the windows, Evelyn went into labor. It was fast. Too fast, according to the medical team scrambling to keep up. 6 hours from first contraction to final push, and then there was a baby screaming in her arms. A girl, small and red and furious at being born, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be her father's. She's perfect, Dominic whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger that shook slightly. She's absolutely perfect. She's a person we made. That's insane. Evelyn was crying and laughing and completely exhausted. We made an actual person. We did. And now we have to keep her alive and happy for the next 18 years minimum. He looked terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. I have no idea what I'm doing. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. They named her Sophia, after the cook who'd made Evelyn's favorite risotto that first terrible dinner. Sophia Varese, born at dawn on a Tuesday, weighing 7 pounds exactly, healthy and loud, and immediately loved beyond reason. The first few weeks were chaos, sleepless nights and constant feedings, and the particular exhaustion that came from being completely responsible for a tiny human who couldn't communicate except through crying. Evelyn had never been more tired in her life, had never been happier either, watching Dominic hold their daughter like she was made of glass, singing to her in Italian when she wouldn't sleep, walking circles around the room at 3 in the morning, because movement was the only thing that calmed her down. "You're good at this," Evelyn told him one night, watching him change Sophia's diaper with the focused concentration he usually reserved for complex financial transactions. "I'm terrified I'm doing it wrong." "We're both terrified. But look at her, she's thriving, she's loved. That's what matters." Evelyn stretched, trying to work the stiffness from her shoulders. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The 6 months are up. Have been for a while now. You said I could leave if I wanted, that you'd give me money and documents and a new identity." She paused. "I don't want to leave." Dominic looked up from the diaper, his expression carefully neutral. "You don't have to tell me that just because we have a baby together. If you want to go, we'll figure out custody arrangements. I won't keep you here against your will." "I know you won't. That's why I'm staying." She moved closer. "I choose this. Choose you. Choose the life we're building. Not because I have to, not because I'm trapped, but because I actually want it. Is that enough?" "It's everything." He finished with Sophia and lifted her carefully, bringing her to Evelyn. "I don't deserve you, either of you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning what I've been given. You've already earned it. You became someone different for us, someone better. That's more than most people ever manage." She took their daughter, felt the familiar weight of her, breathed in that particular baby smell that was already becoming home. "We're a family now. A weird, unconventional family with a really strange origin story, but a family. Best family I've ever had." He wrapped his arms around both of them. "Only family I've ever had that mattered." They stood like that for a long time. 3 people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to stay through the hard work of building something real. Sophia fell asleep between them, making small, snuffling sounds that would probably wake her up again in an hour. The sun was rising beyond the windows, painting everything gold. Evelyn had been kidnapped, sold, held captive in this house. Had spent months hating the man who now held her like she was precious. Had every reason to run, and had chosen instead to stay, to build, to love. And standing here with her daughter and the man who'd fought to become worthy of them both, she couldn't regret a single impossible step that had led her here. "I love you," she told Dominic. "Both of you. My strange, unexpected family." "We love you too," he said. "More than you know." And in that moment, watching the sunrise paint the sea in shades of hope, Evelyn believed him completely. "Mom." 5 years later, Sophia Varese stood on the balcony of the house she'd been born in, pointing at boats in the harbor far below. "Mama, can we go on a boat?" "Maybe this afternoon," Evelyn said, brushing dark curls from her daughter's face. "If Papa finishes his work in time." "Papa's always working." Sophia made it sound like a complaint, but without much heat. She knew her father, knew he'd show up eventually with some treat or story or game that would make the waiting worthwhile. Papa's building something important, a foundation that helps people who need help. Evelyn had explained it a dozen times, in child-appropriate terms. The foundation had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined, helping trafficking victims, funding education programs, partnering with law enforcement to shut down operations like the one that had sold her. Dominic had taken his knowledge of criminal networks and used it to dismantle them from within. It was dangerous work. Meaningful work, the kind that let him sleep at night. "Will you tell me the story?" Sophia asked. "About how you and Papa met?" "You've heard that story 100 times. But I like it. Please?" Evelyn looked out at the sea, remembering a different version of herself standing on a different balcony, calculating whether the fall would kill her. That girl seemed impossibly far away now, young and frightened and certain her life was over. She'd been wrong about that last part. "Your father and I met during a difficult time," she started, using the language they'd agreed on. "I was in trouble, and he helped me. It wasn't a traditional beginning, and it took us a long time to become friends. But eventually we did, and eventually we fell in love, and eventually we decided to build a life together. And then you had me. And then we had you. and you made everything better and more complicated and definitely louder. She tickled Sophia, who shrieked with laughter. Now go find your books. We'll read before lunch. Sophia ran off, and Evelyn stood alone on the balcony, remembering. The auction. The fortress. The slow, painful journey from captivity to choice. The man who'd bought her and then spent years proving he deserved to keep her. The baby that had forced both of them to become better than they'd been. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind. Dominic, smelling like coffee and the particular cologne he knew she liked. What are you thinking about? How far we've come. How different everything is from what I imagined that first night. Better or worse? Different. Complicated. Sometimes hard. But also good. Really, really good. She turned in his arms. No regrets? Only that it started the way it did. That I didn't meet you in some normal way and court you properly and give you real choices from the beginning. He brushed hair from her face. But I can't regret where we ended up. Can't regret you or Sophia or this life we've built from ashes. Poetic for 10 in the morning. I contain multitudes. You know this. He kissed her forehead. The Benedetti investigation wrapped up. He's going to prison for the rest of his life, along with everyone else we helped them build cases against. So it's really over. All of it. All of it. We're completely legitimate now. Boring even. Just a family running a foundation and a winery and trying to raise a daughter who doesn't inherit too many of my worst qualities. He grinned. Though she's already showing signs of being stubborn and calculating. Wonder where she gets that. Definitely her father. Definitely her mother. Who convinced me to dismantle my entire criminal empire through sheer force of will and occasional well-placed arguments about moral responsibility. I just wanted our daughter to have a father who wasn't in danger of being arrested or killed. You did the actual work. We did it together. Like everything else. He pulled her closer. I love you. In case you needed reminding. I love you too, despite everything, because of everything, however it happened. I love you. Sophia's voice called from inside. Mama, Papa, I found the book about the dragon. We're coming, Evelyn called back. She looked up at Dominic. Ready for the dragon story? She'll want all the voices. I'm always ready for the dragon story. I do an excellent dragon voice. They went inside together to where their daughter waited with a book and demands for entertainment. And later they'd have lunch, and later still they'd take the boat out like Sophia wanted. And eventually the day would end with all of them tangled together, reading one more story before bed. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. It was nothing like what Evelyn had imagined her life would be when she was 22 and studying literature and dreaming of becoming a writer. It was better. Because she had become a writer, eventually, had started documenting the Foundation's work, telling the stories of survivors, using language to build understanding and support, had found purpose beyond her own survival, had built something meaningful from the ashes of trauma. And she had this man who'd bought her and then spent years earning the right to keep her, who transformed himself completely because she and their daughter deserved better, who loved her with an intensity that still sometimes took her breath away. And she had Sophia, brilliant and stubborn and full of questions, who would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and worth every impossible thing her parents had done to build her a safe world. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the house was quiet, Evelyn stood on the balcony again with Dominic beside her. The sea was dark and calm, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different? She asked. If my father hadn't stolen that money, if I hadn't been taken, if you hadn't bid on me? Sometimes, but I try not to. That way lies madness, all the what-ifs and might-have-beens. He pulled her against his side. I'd rather focus on what is, on what we built from disaster, on the fact that we're here, together, safe and happy, and raising a daughter who'll never know what it's like to be powerless. She'll know about it, though, eventually. We agreed we'd tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand. We will. And we'll tell her that sometimes terrible things lead to beautiful outcomes, that people can change, that love can grow in the strangest places if you give it room. He kissed her temple. And we'll tell her that her mother is the strongest person I've ever met, that she survived something impossible and came out the other side fierce and whole and determined to make the world better. You're giving me too much credit. I'm giving you exactly the credit you deserve. You could have broken, could have let this destroy you. Instead, you adapted and survived and eventually thrived. That's not luck, Evelyn. That's strength. She leaned into him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, the absolute certainty that he would protect her and their daughter with everything he had. I'm glad it was you. I'm glad that of all the terrible men who could have bought me that night, it was you. Does that make me crazy? It makes you honest, and it makes me grateful beyond words. He turned her to face him. I will spend the rest of my life proving I was worth that gratitude, worth your choice to stay, worth your love. You already have. Every single day you prove it. They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead and the sea whispered against the cliffs. And inside the house, their daughter slept safe and loved, dreaming whatever 5-year-olds dream about. Dragons, probably. Boats and adventures and all the possibilities of a life that stretched ahead of her, unlimited and bright. Evelyn had been kidnapped, sold, imprisoned, had every reason to hate the man who held her now. But somewhere in the impossible journey from that auction in Monaco to this balcony on this night, she discovered something unexpected, that love could grow from darkness, that choice could emerge from captivity, that two people could build something real and good from the worst possible beginning. She wouldn't recommend the path to anyone, wouldn't wish it on her worst enemy. But she also wouldn't trade where it had led her, to this man, this child, this strange and beautiful life they'd built together. Come to bed, Dominic murmured against her hair. Sophia will be up at dawn wanting pancakes and stories. In a minute. I just want to stand here a bit longer. So they did. Stood together watching the darkness, remembering the journey, grateful for the destination. And when they finally went inside, it was hand in hand, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and chosen to stay through all the days that followed. That, Evelyn thought as she climbed into bed beside him, was its own kind of miracle. The kind you couldn't plan for or predict. The kind that emerged from disaster and transformed into grace. The kind that proved, against all logic and reason, that even from the darkest beginning, something bright could grow. She fell asleep with his arm around her and their daughter safe down the hall, and dreamed of mornings yet to come, of pancakes and boats, and a life built from impossible choices, sustained by unexpected love, and filled with the particular joy that came from having survived the worst and chosen to stay for the best. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when this started, but it was the ending she'd earned through courage and resilience and the willingness to see past what had been done to her toward what could still be built. And that made it perfect.